Hey, what is up guys, MKBHD here, and welcome to the HTC One M9 hands-on. So this is the successor to one of the most well-liked phones from last year, the HTC One M8, and most of the outside hardware, as you can see, has stayed pretty much the same, while the specs got the bump on the inside. So that's really the long story short with this phone. It's kind of like the equivalent of the HTC One M8s. So it's an incremental improvement, but I think in the best possible way, because the One M8 was already one of the best phones of last year. So of course it's metal everywhere again, and the minor changes you get are, one additional color choice in pink, and there's also now a two-toned look, so the sides have a different color than the front and back. So this silver version, for example, has gold stripes on the sides where the buttons are. And these buttons are actually in a new place. So I mentioned in my What to Expect video, the ridged power button has moved to the right side underneath the volume button. So it's much easier to reach now here. And overall, the metal has more of a brushed look. So you can tell that when you put it up next to the One M8. Now, I'm not sure how slippery this is going to be. This one is on a tether, so it's keeping me from dropping it at all, but I'm feeling like it's going to have the same pretty slippery feel in the hand as the One M8, so I think I'm going to end up putting a skin on it when I get it, but I'll at least give it a shot with no skin or case for my full review. But otherwise, on the outside, the boom sound speakers are still there, so 1 year later, they're still some of the loudest and crispest and clearest of any phone, and they're supposedly enhanced this time around with Dolby surround sound, but I'll have to get in a quiet area and test that out again for the full review to see if it's worth the change. But otherwise, yeah, it's still boom sound. You also still get microSD card expandable storage, so I guess that's something that was noticeably missing from Samsung's new flagship. You also still get a 5-inch 1080p display, so not Quad HD. And I don't mind this really. I suspect we'll see Quad HD in the next HTC flagship, but with a 1080p screen here, we're still getting 441 ppi, and it's still a great display. Awesome brightness, great colors, great viewing angles. In fact, this was one of the best 1080p displays of any smartphone last year too. And I know some people wanted them to get rid of that bottom bezel with the HTC logo, but you gotta realize the display drivers have to go somewhere, and that's pretty much all of the bezel of this phone. You gotta remember how much space those speakers take up. So the one main hardware change that they really made to this phone was the camera on the back. So that One M9 is rocking an all-new 20 megapixel sensor. No optical image stabilization, but it can take 4K video now, and of course now it takes these very high-resolution photos. And this is the #1 thing I will be testing in the full review process. I got to spend a little bit of time with this phone, obviously in a press room with this crazy, terrible lighting, and it's on a tether, so I could really only point and shoot at so many things. And the images looked okay on the one screen, but I really wanted to go out and test this new camera as deeply as I can, bring images back to the computer, pixel peep and everything, so you can be sure that I know the most that I can about this new camera. But, we'll see how that goes. So obviously no more ultra pixels on the back, but they did stick around and keep the ultra pixels for the front-facing camera, which is this really wide-angle lens, and I guess that makes sense for selfies, so the ultra pixels aren't gone forever, but that new camera module is definitely something to test a lot. Now inside this phone, like I said, you get a spec upgrade, so Snapdragon 810 chip, 3 GB of RAM, and HTC Sense 7 on top of Android 5.0 Lollipop in the software department. Not a whole lot of preloaded apps here, and this new version of Sense does seem, flatter and smoother and more responsive, as it should on Lollipop. And they've added some new features like quick themes in the settings, and even this custom widget, which is essentially a grid of icons that changes what apps show up based on your location. So I guess it's supposed to be smart enough that when you leave home and go to work, it switches over to showing you your work apps. So stuff like that should work automatically, and of course you can manually toggle it if it's not smart enough, but also it'll apparently suggest some new apps that you don't have installed, so I hope that works well and isn't distracting. But yeah, you can see everything else looks really familiar here to previous HTC One owners. Multitasking is smooth, all the buttons and things you would expect are right where you'd find them on the last version. I really can't wait to spend more time with this phone off a tether and in my pocket to really get to know it well, but my sentiment really, I read a lot of these tweets and people who are talking about, oh, I'm disappointed with this phone, or I really expected more. But if you're HTC, you took one of the best phones of last year in the One M8, and you fixed and improved everything that was wrong with it, and you bumped up the specs. Boom, there's your One M9. I can see why people are complaining because they wanted a big design refresh and a huge change, but HTC can't do that every year, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I imagine HTC is pretty happy with this phone, and all the changes they've made seem to be for the better, so the testing will begin as soon as I get my hands on one, and I'm pretty pumped. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to be one of the first to see the full review when it does come out. Until then, thank you for watching this one, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.